Ahoy Rovers! Well, in this video we'll be checking that scarf joint and making sure it's acceptable. Then it's a little bit of work on it, and then we'll be installing it. We'll be fitting it onto these frames, and that is going to be one of those moments when you say, wow, that's beginning to look like a boat. Anyway, between now and then, there's quite a lot to do. Time to crack on. Well, the first thing you want to do after unclamping and checking that scarf joint is clean up the glue residue, because the more you can take off with the block plane in this case, the less it's going to gum up your belt sander. Well, I decided to work outside for the next few steps, and the reason is because I wanted to keep the dust down inside the boat shed, but also the boat shed is infested with flies right now. We have no idea why, but to escape them is a mercy. So that's why I'm outside. Now with the belt sander, you really need to keep that moving. If you stop at any point, it's just going to dig a big hole in your pine. So have yourself all cleared aside so that you'll be able to move that belt sander up and down without any issues. Well, here's a close-up of the scarf. Now we're looking at the back side there to start with, and you don't really need to clean that too much because that's going to get glued against the plywood. But really, the scarf is a beautiful joint, and take a moment just to enjoy it. Anyway, on to the next step. Well, the next step is to grab your router, and we're going to put a round over on the bottom edge on the inside of the stringer. Now the router makes a lot of noise and it looks very aggressive, but it's incredibly safe as long as you keep both hands on the router. Well, the router really gives you that finished look. However, we're not quite done yet. We still need to hit it with the palm sander. Well, the palm sander is nowhere near as aggressive as a belt sander. However, just like the belt sander, you have got to keep it moving, because if you don't, it'll dig a hole. And really, that goes for any bit of sanding you might do. Even if it's just sandpaper with a block of wood, you cannot keep in one position too long or you're just going to dig a hole. Well, that's it. It's finished now. It didn't take very long to accomplish these 3 steps. You can see that the back side really hasn't been touched very much because that gets glued to the plywood. It's really just the edges you'll see that I have sanded and finished. The top edge, again, it doesn't need to be finished very much because the deck will be glued to that or other things. So anyway, it's all done. It's looking good. Time to take it back inside the shed. Now, if you remember from the video I made about lofting the frames, well, I marked the shear line on all the frames. So now I'm going to make a notch at that point so that the shear stringer will fit into that notch. So after taking considerable time getting the stem exactly where I want it to be, I have to take it back off again. And the reason is because there was a little bit of an oversight where it meets the shear stringer. You see, when I put the shear stringer up against here, you can see that it's actually butting tight against our 2x6 support. So what I have to do is I have to take a notch out of that 2x6. And you can see it right here with the pencil. It's not a big deal. but I have to get the saw in there. And there's another reason too. This area all along the bottom here, I need to cover that in packing tape, along with the whole 2x6 structure, because we want to make sure when the glue is put on the stem piece to attach the plywood, we don't want any dripping over the edge and fixing the stem to the 2x6 support, because at a certain point we have to lift the boat right off this whole temporary structure, and we just don't want these two things bonded together. Anyway, a lot to do, time to crack on. So Rovers, what I've done here is I've put all this packing tape, just regular old packing tape, on top of this temporary support. And the reason for that is when the stem goes on here, you will have pieces that are glued to it, and any excess glue we don't want forming a bond between the stem and the temporary piece, because we have to be able to lift the boat off of this when the plywood is on it. So that's the reason for that. It was an oversight. I have to actually do it at all the joints, all the shear joints on the frames as well. So yeah, time to reinstall this. Luckily, I had marked the stem with little lines indicating where this is located. And you'll know you're back in the same spot because the screws will find their previous hole, which really helps a lot. Anyway, time now to crack on with the shear. Well, you'll notice that I extend my little finger as I hold the saw, and you might be asking why. Well, the answer is because I'm a classy carpenter. By the time you take out the notch on each side, there isn't much left, but that's okay because all we need to do is just glue the stringer in. What's below the notch is just waste. It's going to be removed anyway, and the deck goes on top. Well, it's one of those moments of truth for a boat builder. You know, as you put the shear in, Will it work? Will it all line up? Will it produce a fair curve? And that's what Brian has given me a hand with here. We're bending the shear into all the notches.
Okay. That's it. That is it. Thank you very much, Brian.
Not a problem at all.
Okay,
Glad to help.
great.
Nice looking shear.
Yes.
Well, that's high praise indeed when an islander says it's a good-looking shear. Well, it's one of those moments where you just have to stand back and take a look and enjoy what you've done, you know, because it's one of those things that really defines the shape of the boat, the shear line. And in this case, I'm very happy with the result. Well, Rovers, I have left the shear stringer in place overnight. And the reason for that was because, well, we wanted it to take up a little bit of memory of the curve. You see, when I told Andy, the naval architect, that I was going to be doing this, he was a little concerned that I wasn't going to steam the piece of pine before. And it's not a bad idea to steam, not at all. But just over the years, I've gained a fair bit of experience with wood. And as I was bending it, I was very cognizant of any cracking or stress. With experience, you begin to feel it in your hands if you're going too far. But it wasn't. So we carefully placed it in position. Now it's stayed there overnight. Now I'm going to remove it. I've marked the positions of it. I'm going to remove it. And the reason is because I need to put packing tape in behind it, because when we glue the plating to it, we don't want the glue squeezing out to the temporary frame and then making a bond. Because eventually, as I've said a couple of times now, we need to remove these temporary frames at a certain point when we turn the hull over. And when they're removed, well, we don't want them stuck to the side of the ply, because that'll be a mess to clean up. So that's the reason why. Anyway, time to crack on. And finally, a little design improvement to make dismantling the strong back after the hull plating is on just a wee bit easier. A little less clumsy and a little more elegant. Well, it's an honor to add a new name to the Benefactor's bulkhead, Patrick Lavenza. Now, the names in the Benefactor's bulkhead have made a donation of $100 US or more, and their names will be written on a bulkhead inside Wave Rover and will travel with me on the circumnavigation. These funds are much appreciated. I'd also like to welcome our two new patrons, Russ Dello and Trevor Bourgeois. Their pledges of support, along with our existing patrons, contribute to the creation of these videos in so many ways. Thank you. Well, Rovers, in the next video, it's all about getting that plywood out and prepping it to go onto the boat. So until next time, thanks for watching.